One of my favorite Flash storylines and really crossover events in all of DC Comics is without a doubt 2011's Flashpoint. I think it's one of the best examples of time travel done right in comics, in a meaningful way. There's a strong mystery behind everything going on that you slowly discover the truth behind as the story progresses, keeping you invested. There are heavy, emotional moments that pull at your heartstrings. The idea of sacrifice. If a selfless choice is worth the cost of, well, everything else you hold dear. And the story is as deep as you want it to be. There's a main 5-issue Flashpoint series written by Jeff Johns with art by Andy Kubert that goes through the story from start to finish, the only one that's required, but also a few tie-in issues as well that help pad out and further expand some of the main story's elements, a few of which I will be diving into a little bit here in my video review, just for funsies. In Flashpoint, Barry Allen suddenly wakes up in his office at the Central City Police Department. He finds the world around him different than what he remembers. Central City's greatest hero isn't the Flash, him, but rather one of his archenemies, Captain Cold, going by the moniker of Citizen Cold. Barry soon discovers that he doesn't have his speed powers, or his special ring which stores his red and yellow superhero costume. After falling down some stairs, he comes face to face with his elderly mother, Nora, who says Barry had promised to take her out to dinner for her birthday. Barry hugs his mom tight and doesn't want to let go. Those of you familiar with Barry's origin would know that Barry's mother had been murdered when he was young. His father, Henry, had been wrongfully convicted of the crime, and it's what motivated Barry to become a forensic chemist. He hoped to use the skills to find the real perpetrator to clear his father's name, though unfortunately his dad would die in prison and would not be proven innocent until years later. Tragic. Anyways, through his mother, Barry comes to learn that the Flash does not exist. Neither does the Justice League. Justice who? Wondering just what in the dickens is going on, much like the rest of us, Barry borrows his mother's car and drives to Gotham City, ironically getting stuck in traffic behind someone with an "I brake for no reason" bumper sticker. Hilarious. Barry's intention is to meet with Bruce Wayne, Batman. The two heroes have always had a great deal of respect for one another. They have dealt with similar tragedies in their lives. Bruce had even said at one point that Barry was the kind of man he would have hoped to become if his parents weren't murdered in that alleyway. When Barry arrives at Wayne Manor, he finds it unkept and abandoned. He calls out to Alfred, but gets no response. Knowing the entrance to the Batcave is located behind the grandfather clock, he simply moves it and strolls on down. He finds the cave very barren, simple, with only a couple wooden tables with gear on them. There is a display case housing a gun, and behind it is a picture of the Wayne family. All of a sudden, Batman appears and attacks Barry. He demands to know who he is and how he got in here. The Dark Knight hesitates when Barry mentions Bruce's name. Batman explains that Bruce is dead. This Batman standing in front of Barry isn't Bruce, but Bruce's father, Dr. Thomas Wayne. When it comes to alternate reality Batmans, you can't get much better than the one from Flashpoint. He's definitely one of my personal favorites. The Thomas Wayne Batman is like the super depressed, alcoholic version of the Caped Crusader, who gives into his pain, lets the tragic events that took place behind the Monarch Theater overwhelm him, instead of just motivating him. What drives Thomas is the senseless death of his son. Bruce was the only one to get shot that night. Thomas is guilty over what happened, becomes bitter, self-centered, and self-destructive. There is no balance between the two sides of his life. His surface world has more or less been destroyed. His estate, his family, it's all in shambles. All that's left, really, is what's found underground. His Batcave, much like him, is an empty shell. It's not the clean and technologically advanced one we're used to. Thomas Wayne kills as Batman, shoots people, breaks necks, throws criminals off of buildings. He doesn't give two shits because he doesn't feel like he has anything to live for. Neither does the scum of Gotham. Thugs like Joe Chill, which he killed shortly after Bruce's death in retaliation for his ghastly actions. Batman has turned the gun on Gotham's criminals, giving them a taste of their own medicine. And speaking of medicine, I also love the little details with this Batman. Thomas Wayne's knowledge as a surgeon comes into play with his crime fighting. He coats some of his batarangs with anesthesia, for example, to make them more effective. Anywho, in the Batcave, Batman would break Barry's hand and rough him up a great deal. Barry tries his best to explain himself, but Batman hears none of it, calling him delusional, and wonders why someone claiming to be the fastest man alive would take such a beating. Barry's memories start changing, merging with the new events of this altered timeline, and once the things he's saying begin lining up with reality, Batman lets him talk. Barry locates his ring in one of his jacket pockets and tries to prove to Batman that he is in fact the superhero known as the Flash. The compressed costume that pops out of it, though, is the yellow and red one worn by Eobard Thawne, the villain known as Professor Zoom. Barry believes that the suit was put there purposefully by his enemy as a sick message. For those of you unfamiliar with Professor Zoom, or Reverse Flash if you prefer, this asshole is a real piece of work. He's a scientist from the 25th century who became obsessed with the Flash, Barry Allen, and his powers, so much so that he wanted to become the Flash in every way possible. He would discover the Speed Force, the energy field that gives all speedsters in the DC universe their power, and would replicate the accident that turned Barry Allen into the Flash when he was covered in various chemicals that had been struck by lightning, to give himself those same abilities. Eobard corrupted the Speed Force by doing this, though, which created a negative version of it, which is what Reverse Flash would draw his powers from. The negative Speed Force gives him abilities other speedsters do not normally have, mainly the ability to travel through and manipulate time to their liking. Time travel is something other speedsters can do, but only using a special device built by Barry Allen called the Cosmic Treadmill, powered by cosmic rays. Changing the course of history is something they don't really do, though, because it can lead to disastrous consequences, sending shockwaves throughout reality. But being an egotistical and psychotic, overly attached fanboy, Eobard Thawne doesn't care about that sort of thing. After traveling to the past and visiting the Flash Museum, Thawne learned that he was destined to become Barry Allen's greatest adversary. Fueled by his jealousy and hatred of the hero, he wanted to prevent Barry from becoming the Flash and make himself the only version of Flash to ever exist. However, he couldn't just prevent Barry from getting his powers, as that would prevent Eobard from getting his as well, due to the unique connection he has with the negative Speed Force. So, he had to do more. He had to alter several events throughout Barry's life, all the way back to his childhood, starting with being the one responsible for killing his mother. Barry has been targeted by the Reverse Flash his entire life. The villain hates him with every fiber of his being for simply existing. Harsh. He's an enemy Barry has made from the future that has gone backwards in time to eradicate every part of him. When Barry mentions that Bruce is alive in his timeline, is Batman one of his best friends, that gives Thomas enough reason to trust him and help him succeed in undoing all of the damage Professor Zoom has caused. On top of Wayne Manor during a thunderstorm, Barry tries to replicate the accident that gave him his powers. He straps himself to a chair, surrounded by specific, unspecified chemicals, which are struck by lightning. Sadly, it doesn't work, and Barry is left with third-degree burns on 75% of his body. while Barry lies in the Batcave in bandages, writhing in pain from his chemical burns and is recuperating. Batman goes out to stop the Joker, who had kidnapped the twin children of Gotham Judge Harvey Dent. This takes place in one of Flashpoint's 3-issue tie-in stories called Batman: Night of Vengeance. In the series, we see the various changes that are found in this timeline's Gotham City. Thomas Wayne runs multiple casinos that he has managed by his chief of security, Oswald Cobblepot. He uses them as a way to fund his vigilantism, but also to draw out criminals. The GCPD has become a privatized police force, owned and funded by Thomas Wayne as well, with Jim Gordon acting as its commissioner. Oracle is not Barbara Gordon in this timeline, but Selina Kyle, presumably injured in similar fashion to how Barbara had been. Jim didn't have a wife or any children in this timeline, so Barbara doesn't even exist. Commissioner Gordon would learn of the Joker's location, the abandoned remains of Wayne Manor. He tries to stop the villain by himself, and shoots what he thinks is Joker, only for it to be revealed as one of Dent's twins. As Jim goes to help the wounded child, he gets his throat violently cut by the villain, who had been hiding in the shadows. Batman races to Wayne Manor in the Batmobile, and we come to realize that the Joker in this universe is his wife Martha, who had become deranged following the death of her son. She had undergone intense therapy to cope with her loss, but was unable to conquer her grief and sadness. She lost her smile until she gave herself a new one with a knife. Following the death of their child, Thomas and Martha Wayne would go down 2 completely different paths and begin hating each other as a result. Batman arrives at the manor and comforts the children in a moment that mirrors his final seconds with Bruce. It's touching and poetic. The former lovers fight, and a chase ensues, which leads outside the mansion. Thomas can't bring himself to kill his wife, but feels the need to tell her that he may have found a way to save their son at the cost of both their lives. He asks Martha if he should go through with it, and for a brief moment Martha appears to regain her sanity and tells him to promise her that he will. She then runs away again and falls to her death, falling down the same hole her son would find in another timeline, the cave filled with bats that would change his life forever. After returning to the Batcave, Thomas would find Barry awake, and more of his memories would continue to realign with the altered ones. Worried that Barry will forget Bruce, desperate to keep the last piece of his son alive, Thomas would bring Barry back up to the manor's roof to try and recreate the accident again, though Batman thinks it may be a fool's errand and will most assuredly lead to Barry's death. Miraculously, though, another lightning bolt strikes the chemicals. The explosion knocks Batman off the roof, but before he can be impaled by the fence spikes surrounding Wayne Manor, he is caught and saved by Barry, who has been reconnected with the Speed Force at last. It also allows him to heal from his injuries. Can I just stop for a second and say how insane Barry Allen is to be willing to be hit by lightning twice? The first time almost killed him. He had severe burns over most of his body. Who's to say the second would have worked? Odds are they wouldn't have. He would have died. His reality would have been lost in the ether forever. But that just goes to show you how much Barry is willing to sacrifice to fix everything. Lose his life, lose his mom again. It's just like when he died, destroying the Anti-Monitor's canon in Crisis on Infinite Earths to save the entire DC universe. Love or hate the Barry Allen Flash as a character, you can't deny he's one of the greatest superheroes of all time, as selfless as they come. Call Barry's reconnection with the Speed Force and Flashpoint luck, call it fate, doesn't matter. All that matters was that the Flash was back, baby, using his reacquired powers in combination with materials found in Wayne Manor. He is able to turn Professor Zoom's costume into one of his own. The comic says it's done by breaking down the threads of the outfit to near infinity. The Flash and Batman sit in the mansion's library behind the small screen of a pitiful lone computer, a very slow one, might I add. Batman asks Barry why he can't just alter time like Earbard can, but like I mentioned previously, regular speedsters can't do it like he can. And even if they could, it would be too dangerous to even try, due to the repercussions it would have on all reality. Barry wants to find the rest of the Justice League members, but believes they may have been targeted by Professor Zoom as well, to ensure the Earth's greatest superhero team was never formed. They start with the big guns first, of course, Superman. Batman learns of a rocket that had crash-landed in Metropolis 30 years ago during a meteor shower that killed 35,000. Barry believes it must be the same rocket that brought Superman to Earth. Batman figures the best person to ask about it, where the rocket had been taken, would be Victor Stone, Cyborg. In Flashpoint, Cyborg is America's greatest superhero, instead of Superman like in the regular timeline. Cyborg had been putting a team of superheroes together to defend the planet from an ongoing Amazon-Atlantean war between Wonder Woman and Aquaman. Batman is the world's greatest strategist, and when he declines to join Cyborg's group, believing the fight to be futile, the rest of the heroes refuse to join up as well. And this brings us to the war, another one of the interesting aspects of this storyline that defies any and all expectations you may have had about this new timeline. The main Flashpoint series explains the conflict well enough, but if you want more detail behind it, the catalysts that ignited everything, then you might want to read the two tie-in series called Emperor Aquaman and Wonder Woman and the Furies. Basically, when Diana was younger, she was attacked by a sea monster off the coast of Themyscira, Paradise Island. Arthur Curry, Aquaman, saved her from it, but she had been poisoned, and he took her to Atlantis to heal. When she was safely returned home, Diana's mother, Queen Hippolyta, would extend her hand, and the hand of all of Themyscira, to Atlantis in friendship. Arthur and Diana would fall in love, and were set to be married to unify the two dynasties in an effort to save the planet. However, on their wedding day, Queen Hippolyta was killed in a botched assassination whose real target was Diana. The spear had been thrown by an Amazon named Artemis, the bodyguard of Hippolyta's sister Penthesilea, who was in a romantic relationship herself with Arthur's corrupt brother Orm, Ocean Master. The two had conspired against the marriage to save their two sovereign lands and ensure they stayed separate entities. Atlantis was framed for Hippolyta's assassination, and years later, during a visit from Arthur to try and rebuild his trust with Diana, Themyscira would be attacked and destroyed by several explosives, also blamed on the Atlanteans. Wonder Woman and her Amazons would conquer the United Kingdom and declare it New Themyscira. Arthur's wife Mera, Queen of Atlantis, would take it upon herself to go to the newly formed Amazon island and attempt to take out Diana behind his back. She failed and was beheaded by Wonder Woman, who stole her helmet and wore it as a warning to the rest of the Atlanteans to not fuck with her or New Themyscira. Obviously, this enraged Aquaman, since his father died when he was just a teenager. In this Flashpoint timeline, Arthur wasn't taught strong lessons regarding care and compassion towards the surface world, and, well, Aquaman would sink Western Europe with a tidal wave during an attack on New Themyscira, and it would lead to the deaths of over 60 million innocent people. The human race would be caught in the crossfire of this war, and attempts had been made to stop it, mainly Cyborg's proposed supergroup. The Flash and Batman meet with Cyborg and convince him to hack into decrypted government files to learn where Superman's rocket had been taken, and they uncover a top-secret underground facility a half a mile beneath Metropolis called Project Superman, which was created to develop super soldiers for the United States military to protect the Earth from extraterrestrial threats. The Flash, Batman, and Cyborg successfully infiltrate the compound, and behind a large, imposing door with Superman's symbol on it, they find Subject 1, Kal-El, but he is far from imposing himself, skinny, frail, like he had not seen the sun in years, let alone many human beings. Despite the Flash's claims, Batman and Cyborg refuse to believe that he is the most powerful being on the planet, judging a book by its cover. The heroes escape the facility with Superman, and seeing the sun immediately strengthens Kal-El, but he quickly becomes overwhelmed by everything. Soldiers are on their tail, firing weapons at them, and Batman pressuring him to do something to fight back doesn't help matters, so he flies away and leaves Flash, Batman, and Cyborg to fend for themselves against the military personnel. Batman says Superman is not who Flash thinks he is. He bailed on them, ran away like a frightened child. I think that's a bit harsh, but then again, this Batman is a fucking asshole, isn't he? The heroes are saved from the soldiers by Emily Sung, the Element Woman, who joins their little makeshift team. Barry has even more painful memory alterations involving his mother, father, and the events surrounding his father's death. Thomas gives Barry some phenytoin sodium, an anti-epileptic, to reduce the electrical activity going on in his brain. Thomas tells Barry to keep fighting with everything he has, and to not forget his son. The heroes go to the foster home of the Marvel family to recruit another hero to their cause, Shazam, Captain Marvel, who is known as Captain Thunder in the Flashpoint timeline. It's here where they learn from a newscaster that an air assault made by the United States against New Themyscira had failed, and a fleet of invisible jets had taken out pilot Hal Jordan, who had never received his Green Lantern power ring from Abin Sur in this reality. A final assault is also planned by Aquaman and his Atlantean forces against Wonder Woman and her Amazons. The Flash pulls Batman aside and tells him that they can't sit idly by while innocent people's lives are at risk. The timeline he finds himself in may be wrong, but right now it's the only reality there is and might ever be. Batman is far more pessimistic about everything though. He feels that if Barry can't save this world, he might as well just let it burn in hell. Thanks for the pep talk, Batman. Really helps. Barry asks Cyborg to try and gather all of Earth's superhumans again to stop the war, but Vic says the only way they will all agree to help is if Batman agrees as well. The heroes of Earth believe in him, believe in the myth of Batman, and think he's invincible. Batman continues to say no, though. That is until Barry tells him that Bruce would have gone with them. Oof, that's rough. All of the heroes, including Batman, combine their efforts and go to Europe to end the war. Captain Thunder attacks Wonder Woman, but the Marvel family is pulled apart by the Enchantress's magic. She had been a spy for the Amazons all along. The young Billy Batson is then stabbed and killed by Diana, just as Professor Zoom finally shows himself to Barry to gloat. Barry is always one step behind him, never quite fast enough. Reverse Flash uses the power of the negative speed force to reset Barry's internal vibrations and make him remember the true cause of this altered timeline, himself. Barry had selfishly traded one life for all of reality by going back in time to save his mother. It is a little contrived and convenient that the biggest piece of the puzzle was the first thing Barry forgot when he had awoken in this timeline, but who cares? The story kept you guessing, or at least made you assume it had just been Reverse Flash's doing all along. But realize Professor Zoom is to blame for how things turned out in this new timeline as well. He had still manipulated multiple aspects of it, but his ability to be able to do so easily was because of Barry. Barry's actions going back in time to save his mother pulled the Speed Force into him and shattered history. Professor Zoom had been running through the time stream when it happened and became free. He was turned into a living paradox that existed outside of time and could follow his own set of rules. He had the power to kill Barry at any point in time without erasing himself in the process. Eobard could hurt Barry, but Barry could not technically hurt him. During all of this monologuing, Zoom doesn't realize that Batman had snuck up behind him with an Amazonian sword and stabs it right through him, killing the villain so Flash doesn't have to. At this point in the story, everything has a burn-it-to-the-ground feel to it. Shit gets crazy and beyond irreversible. Superman returns to fight back Aquaman and Wonder Woman. The Atlanteans activate a device that causes powerful seismic activity, enough to destroy the entire planet, and Batman is critically injured by the Enchantress. With everything going to hell in a handbasket, the dying Thomas Wayne gives Barry a handwritten letter to take with him through time. Barry Allen then does what Barry Allen does best, run as fast as he fucking can to break the time barrier, and without the need of his cosmic treadmill. As he runs, he is conflicted with the new memories of his mother, the life he had with her. He wishes he could somehow find a way to save everyone. He reaches the other version of himself, going back in time to stop Zoom from killing his mom, and merges with himself, which also merges 3 different timelines together to create a new one. Now, I'm not going to go into detail as to which timelines these were because it can get rather confusing, but just know that Flashpoint removed roughly 10 years of DC character history and rebooted the entire DC universe, paving the way for the New 52 relaunch in 2011. The massive story events DC does to alter its universe can feel a bit pretentious and unnecessary at times, but some of these reboots have been pretty damn good. Many people online, including myself, I'm guilty of it, have exaggerated how many times the DC universe has actually resetted itself over the years though. Major resets have only happened twice: Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985 and Flashpoint in 2011. The rest have been minor, soft reboots, simple retcons that every comic book publisher does every now and then with its characters, Marvel included. They just make it less obvious than DC has, who craft entire storylines around this stuff to make big events out of them. Anywho, in the new fixed timeline, Barry enters the Batcave and speaks with Bruce Wayne. He tells him everything that had happened and apologizes for being so selfish. Batman forgives him and says if he had Barry's powers, he would have probably tried to go back in time to save his parents too. Despite his mother being dead, Barry has retained all of the memories he had with her from that alternate life. Bruce calls it a gift. Barry then gives Bruce one, the handwritten letter from his father. Bruce collapses in his chair while reading it. It details how much his father was willing to sacrifice if it meant his son would survive. I doubt it went into how his mother was the Joker and tried to kill a couple kids though. Best leave that part out. Bruce removes his cowl and is in tears. He thanks Barry and calls him one hell of a messenger. Flashpoint has received a bit of mixed reviews since its release in 2011. I think some people may find it to be a bit overrated. If you don't read some of the tie-ins that I mentioned, I think the narrative can feel a bit disjointed in a couple areas. Some of the time travel stuff is made kinda confusing and vague, but that goes with the territory with these kinds of stories. But its weaknesses are not what I focus on. They're not too distracting that it takes away from the core of the story. Its emotion, the sacrifice the characters are forced to make in it, the scorchingly intense rivalry between the central hero and villain, all that stuff is incredible, endlessly fascinating to me. While not perfect, I do still consider Flashpoint to be a classic. It's one of my favorite comic storylines, and easily my favorite of the Flashes. I think its premise is a lot of fun, and has you asking so many interesting questions right out of the gate. It has a strong understanding of who Barry Allen is as a character, and the fact that it introduced me to one of my favorite alternate reality Batmans will always guarantee it a spot in my heart. It's significant in that regard alone. I'd like to hear your thoughts on Flashpoint though, and its equally impressive if not superior animated adaptation, Justice League The Flashpoint Paradox. I want to thank you very much for tuning in to check out this video review. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to help the channel grow and ensure more content like this can come out in the future, think about subscribing, hitting that bell icon for notifications, and by becoming a producer over on Patreon if you can. Any bit helps. I will see you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and always stay nerdy.